On the evening of September 10, 1998, a 10-year-old girl named Anna Palmer was walking home from a friend's house in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was a walk she had made countless times. The two girls went as far as the corner, the halfway point between their two houses, the spot where they always split up, and then they each headed for home. Anna made it. That is the detail that has haunted this case for more than a decade. She made it all the way home. She reached her own front porch, at her own front door, at the house where she lived with her mother. And that is exactly where her mother, Nancy, found her when she got home from work a short time later. Now consider where this happened. This was not a remote road or an empty field. Anna's home sat on a busy street in Salt Lake City. It was across from an elementary school that had an event going on that very evening, meaning parents and children in the area. It was around the hour when that intersection was routinely full of cars. A child was attacked and killed on an open front porch in a residential neighborhood in the middle of all that, and nobody saw anything, nobody heard anything that made them look. A month later, police and volunteers were still handing out flyers on that street, openly incredulous that on a road that busy, there was not one witness. If cases like this one are why you're here, the ones where the answer sat preserved in an evidence envelope for years, waiting for the science to catch up, subscribe to Decades Cold and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. This is exactly what we do here. The case went cold, and it became one of the most notorious unsolved murders in the city's history. But Anna had done something in the last minutes of her life that would eventually finish this. She fought. She fought her attacker with her hands, and in doing so, she took something of his with her. It stayed under her fingernails. And when her fingernails were preserved at autopsy in 1998, the technology of that year could not pull a usable profile from something that small and that faint. So they were kept for 11 years, until a laboratory shone a different kind of light on them, found what was there, and ran it through the National DNA database. The name that came back belonged to a man who had lived just down the street from Anna Palmer. He was 19 years old when she died. He had never been a suspect, never been questioned, never appeared anywhere in that file. And the only reason his DNA was in the system at all is that, years after Anna's death, he had been convicted of a crime against another child. This is the story of Anna Palmer, the neighborhood that could not believe it, and the little girl who caught her own killer with her hands. Anna Palmer was 10 years old, and she was, by her mother's own description, a socialite. I love that word for a 10-year-old, because it tells you exactly what kind of kid she was. She was not a child who stayed inside. She spent most of her time out playing with the other children on her block. She knew everybody. She was part of the fabric of that street. One of those kids who is simply always around, always in the mix, always out front with the other kids on a summer evening. She lived with her mother, Nancy Palmer, on 300 East in Salt Lake City, and the relationship you can glimpse in the record of that last day is a lovely, ordinary one. On the afternoon of September 10th, 1998, Anna called her mother at work, around 5 o'clock, to ask whether she could go play with some of the kids on the block. Think about that small, completely normal exchange. A 10-year-old calling her mom at work to check in and ask permission. Nancy told her yes, go ahead, and let her know roughly when she'd be home. That is the last thing about this story that is uncomplicated. A kid calling her mother, asking to go play, and being told yes. Anna had a best friend named Veronica Porcayo, a girl she had known since kindergarten, and Veronica would grow up, in a way Anna never got to, and would eventually stand in a courtroom as an adult and describe what losing Anna had done to her and to the other children in that neighborhood. She talked about growing up in fear, about carrying a darkened view of the world, because a girl their age had been killed among them and, for more than a decade, nobody knew who had done it or whether he was still nearby. When Veronica stood in that courtroom as a grown woman, she was, as one report put it, a physical reminder of the young woman her best friend might have become. That's who we're talking about, not a case file, a 10-year-old who called her mom for permission to go outside and play, and a best friend she'd had since kindergarten, and a whole block of kids who knew her name. The evening of September 10th, 1998, was ordinary right up until it wasn't. Anna was at a friend's house, A little before 7 o'clock, the girls started walking home. And they did what they always did. They walked together to a corner about midway between their two houses, and there they said goodbye and split off, each heading for her own front door. Neighborhood girls would later report seeing Anna walking home in that window, perhaps 15 to 30 minutes before her mother arrived. So we can be very precise about how small this window was. Anna left her friend. She walked toward her house, and within roughly 15 to 30 minutes, she was dead on her own porch. There is almost no gap in this timeline. It is one of the things that makes the case so disorienting. As one report described it, it was as if 1 minute she was alive, and the next she wasn't. Nancy Palmer got home from work a little after 7, a bit later than usual that day, and she found her daughter on the front porch of their home. I am not going to describe what she found, or what had been done to Anna. The court record contains all of it, and it is genuinely horrifying. And there is nothing in those details that serves Anna or serves you. Here is what matters, stated plainly and then left alone. Anna Palmer was attacked on her own porch, and she was killed there, and the man who did it also abused her. Those were the crimes he would ultimately be charged with. That's as far as we're going. She was 10 years old, on her own doorstep, 30 feet from her own front door. And there is one more piece of that evening that has to be said, because it becomes important later. Some of the neighborhood children reported that they had seen someone following Anna on her walk home. Children saw it. In a busy neighborhood, on a busy street, on an evening full of people, a man followed a 10-year-old girl toward her house, and the only people who noticed were other kids. The investigation that followed ran headfirst into something that should have been impossible. Look at the setting. Anna's home was near an intersection that was traditionally packed with cars in exactly the window when she was killed. Roughly 7 to 7:30 in the evening. It was directly across the street from Whittier Elementary School, which had a school event running that night, meaning an unusual concentration of parents and children coming and going. This was, by any measure, one of the least private places in the city to commit a murder. It was practically a stage. And still, there were no witnesses to the crime itself. Police canvassed. They handed out flyers. A month after Anna died, officers and volunteers were still out on 300 East, and reporters at the time captured their disbelief. How could a girl be killed on a porch, on a street that busy, with a school event across the road, and no one see it? That absence became the defining frustration of the case. Detectives had a child murdered in the open, in a dense neighborhood, at a busy hour, a set of circumstances that should have generated a dozen witnesses, and instead, it generated almost nothing usable. It was disturbing and frustrating in equal measure, and it meant the investigation had no eyewitness to build on, no license plate, no description that led anywhere. There was also, crucially, no obvious suspect. Anna was 10. She had no enemies, no complicated adult entanglements, no one with a motive. The investigation was left looking for a stranger, or for someone so unremarkable, so much a part of the everyday background of that street, that no one thought to look at him at all. And so, despite everything, despite a murdered child, despite an outraged community, despite intense police attention, the case slowed and stalled and went cold. It became one of Salt Lake City's most notorious unsolved cases, the kind that people in that city knew by name for years. Nancy Palmer, who rarely gave interviews, would thank the public for their concern and say that what she wanted was to see the case resolved. For 11 years, it wasn't. Here is where the case turns, and it turns on Anna herself. Because Anna Palmer fought. That is not sentiment. It is forensic fact, and it is written into the evidence. During the attack, she fought her attacker with her hands, and in doing so, she scratched him. She took a piece of him, skin cells, biological material, and it lodged under her fingernails, and it stayed there. And during the initial autopsy in 1998, someone made a decision that would eventually solve this entire case. Anna's fingernails were collected and preserved, not tested successfully, not turned into a name, simply saved. You have to understand the state of the science in 1998 to appreciate why that mattered so much. DNA testing existed by then. It was well established. and it was being used in courtrooms. But what did not yet exist, in any reliable form, was the ability to take an extremely small, degraded, invisible amount of biological material, a few skin cells scraped up under a fingernail during a struggle, and pull a full, usable genetic profile out of it. What we now call touch DNA, the recovery of a profile from the barest trace a person leaves on something they contacted, was still emerging. In 1998, the trace Anna had captured was very likely there, and it was very likely unreadable. So the fingernails went into evidence storage, and they sat, through the flyers and the canvases and the dead ends, through the years when the case slid from active to cold, through more than a decade of a mother waiting. The single most valuable piece of evidence in the entire investigation was sitting in a preserved envelope the whole time, holding the killer's identity, unreadable by the technology of the era in which it was collected. This is the pattern this channel returns to constantly, and I want to name it clearly, because it deserves recognition. The person who bagged and preserved those fingernails in 1998 did not solve this case, but nothing that came later would have been possible without them. Cold cases are solved twice, once by whoever quietly does the unglamorous work of preservation, and once, years later, by whoever finally has the tools to read what was saved. 11 years after Anna Palmer's murder, Salt Lake City police revived the case, and the evidence went to a forensic laboratory for a fresh look, with technology that had advanced enormously since 1998. The lab did something that sounds almost simple, and is, in fact, the whole breakthrough. They used alternative light sources on Anna's preserved fingernails to locate the biological material that was there. Alternative light source examination means illuminating evidence with specific wavelengths of light, outside or at the edges of the visible spectrum, which can make biological traces fluoresce or stand out when they are effectively invisible under ordinary light. It is a way of seeing what your eyes cannot, and using it, analysts were able to find and target the trace material Anna had captured under her nails during the fight for her life. From that recovered material, they built a DNA profile, a full, usable genetic signature of the man who had attacked her, extracted from a trace so small that, 11 years earlier, it had been beyond reach. And then they did the step that took no time at all. They uploaded that profile into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, which holds the genetic profiles of people convicted of qualifying offenses across the country. This is the plainest, most direct question in forensic science. Is this person already in the system? In late 2009, the answer came back, yes. The profile from under Anna Palmer's fingernails matched a convicted offender in the national database, and the DNA analyst who later testified about it gave the jury a sense of how solid that match was. On the most conservative estimate, the chance that this DNA belonged to anyone other than that man was roughly 1 in 11 million. After 11 years, a murdered 10-year-old had, in the words of the district attorney who handled the case, essentially pointed to her own killer. The name that came back was Matthew John Breck, and the first thing investigators learned about him detonated everything the neighborhood had believed for 11 years. Matthew Breck had lived just down the street from Anna Palmer at the time of the murder, not in another city, not passing through, down the street. Police believed Anna may have played with friends near his house. He was part of that same block, the same handful of houses, the same sidewalk, the same everyday geography of a 10-year-old's world. He was 19 years old when Anna was killed. And here is the fact that reframes the entire investigation. Matthew Breck had never been a person of interest. He was not a suspect. He was not on a list. Prosecutors were explicit about it. He did not become a suspect until 2009, when that DNA profile came back and matched him in the database. For 11 years, detectives had been searching for a phantom, and the man was living a few doors down the block the whole time, entirely unexamined. There is one more detail from the night itself, and it is the coldest thing in this case. According to court documents, later that same evening, after the killing, while police were still at the crime scene working Anna's porch, a neighbor saw Breck ducking in and out of cars, leaving the area, and heading off down a side street. Whatever he was doing, he was there. He was moving around the block while officers processed the murder of a child he had killed, on a porch a short walk from his own home. And then, In the 11 years that followed, the reason his DNA ended up in the national database at all. In 2001, Matthew Breck was convicted in Idaho of a sex offense against a child under 16. He had been incarcerated at the Idaho Correctional Institution in Orofino since then. That conviction is what put his genetic profile into CODIS, which means the thing that ultimately named him as Anna Palmer's killer was a crime he committed against another child years later in another state. If he had never offended again, his DNA would never have entered the system, and the profile from Anna's fingernails would have matched nothing. With the match in hand, detectives from Salt Lake City traveled to the Idaho prison where Breck was serving his sentence, and they questioned him about the murder of Anna Palmer. His response, in retrospect, is telling. He admitted that he had lived in the neighborhood at the time. He acknowledged that much, but he denied any involvement in Anna's murder, and he denied even knowing the little girl. Think about the position that puts him in, given what the lab had already found. His DNA, his skin cells, his biological material, was recovered from under the fingernails of a 10-year-old who had been attacked on her own porch. There is a very short list of ways that material gets there, and every one of them involves close physical contact with her. His answer was that he didn't know her at all. He was, in effect, claiming there was no innocent relationship between them of any kind, no reason for his DNA to be anywhere near her, and yet it was, in the one place that only a struggle explains. Investigators knew, at that point, that they had their man. In January of 2010, the Salt Lake District Attorney's Office charged Matthew John Breck, by then 31 years old, with aggravated murder, aggravated sexual abuse of a child, and child abuse. He was extradited from Idaho to Salt Lake City to face them. Aggravated murder in Utah carried the possibility of the death penalty. A preliminary hearing was held in June of 2011, over 3 days of testimony. Witnesses described the last time they had seen Anna alive. Neighborhood witnesses placed Breck near the scene. The DNA analyst explained how the material from Anna's fingernails pointed to him and gave that 1 in 11 million figure. Nancy Palmer testified and made a point that captures the whole cruelty of it. She had never known Matthew Breck. She had never even seen him walking down the sidewalk where her daughter so often played. The man who lived down her street, who killed her child on their porch, was a complete stranger to her. Facing that evidence and facing a capital charge in a death penalty state, Matthew Breck took the only exit available to him. On August 12, 2011, nearly 13 years after Anna Palmer was killed, Breck pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, a first-degree felony. In exchange for that plea, the other charges were dropped, and he was sentenced immediately. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will die in custody. There was no trial, and I want to be honest about the mixed thing that is, because it's worth sitting with. On one hand, a plea means the family is spared the ordeal of a full capital trial. No jury sitting through days of testimony about what happened to a 10-year-old. No years of appeals. No death penalty litigation stretching into the next decade. It ends. On the other hand, a plea means nobody ever has to explain anything. Breck never accounted for why. He never explained what he was doing that evening, or why he followed a child home, or what he thought he was doing when he moved through his own neighborhood afterward while police worked the scene. He simply accepted the sentence and stopped talking. At the sentencing, it was Anna's people who filled that silence. Veronica Porcayo, the best friend from kindergarten, now grown, stood before the judge a few feet from the man in shackles and spoke about the fear she and her friends had lived with, and about the darkened view of the world they had carried while Anna's murder went unsolved for more than a decade. And she spoke of restored hope. That is what a resolution can offer, not the undoing of anything, but the end of not knowing. Nancy Palmer, who had spent 13 years asking the public for help and waiting for an answer, was finally able to feel some measure of peace. Not because anything was fixed, because it was, at last, finished. It's worth pausing on exactly what solved this case, because it's different from the method we've spent so much of this channel discussing. There was no genetic genealogy here. Nobody uploaded a profile to an ancestry site. Nobody built a family tree or traced third cousins. This case was closed by the two most fundamental tools in forensic DNA work, applied well. recovering a profile from an extremely small biological trace, and running that profile against a database of known offenders. The recovery is the impressive half. What Anna captured under her fingernails was a tiny quantity of another person's cells, the kind of trace that, for most of forensic history, was simply invisible and unusable. The advances that made it readable are the same advances that have quietly transformed cold case work everywhere. Better light source techniques for locating material you cannot see, more sensitive extraction, and amplification methods that can build a full profile from a vanishingly small starting sample. It's less glamorous than a family tree, and it has probably solved more cases. And the database half is the part that most people misunderstand. So let me put it plainly. CODIS only works if your suspect is already in it. That's it. That's the whole limitation. And it's why genetic genealogy had to be invented, for the killers who never get arrested. Matthew Breck would have been exactly that kind of killer. In 1998, and for 3 more years afterward, he was invisible to the system. No qualifying conviction, no profile on file, no way for any database to find him. The only reason this case closed the way it did is that he offended again, in 2001, against another child, and that conviction put his DNA in the national database. His own later crime is what named him. That is a genuinely uncomfortable truth to hold. The system caught Anna Palmer's killer because he hurt another child. Had he stopped, had he never been convicted of anything again, the profile from under Anna's fingernails would have been run against CODIS and returned nothing, over and over, indefinitely. I want to spend a moment on what this case did to a neighborhood, because it's the part that outlives the legal outcome. One of Anna's neighbors described it simply, that it was such a hole in the neighborhood to have her gone. She remembered the police, all night long. A block where a 10-year-old had been part of the daily background, always outside, always with the other kids, suddenly had a child-sized absence in it, and a crime scene, and years of unanswered questions. And then, 11 years later, that same neighborhood learned that the person responsible had been one of them, not a drifter, not a stranger who passed through in a car, someone who lived down the street, someone who was there that night, and who was seen moving around the block while officers worked the porch, someone that Anna, a kid who knew everybody on that street, may well have walked past 100 times. There is a specific kind of damage in that. When a stranger commits a crime, a community can, over time, place it outside itself. When it turns out the person came from inside the neighborhood, from the same sidewalk, the same block, it forces a much harder reckoning. Every neighbor becomes, in retrospect, a question. And for the children who grew up on that street in the shadow of an unsolved murder, that is precisely the fear Veronica Porcayo described. The darkened view of the world. The sense that danger wasn't somewhere out there but might be anywhere, including very close by. The resolution gave that neighborhood a name and an ending. It could not give back the 11 years they spent not knowing, or the childhoods that were shaped by living beside an unanswered killing. 3 things to carry out of this one. The first is about preservation, and it is the quiet heart of this case. Anna Palmer's murder was solved because somebody, at an autopsy in 1998, collected and preserved a child's fingernails using the standards of their time, knowing full well that the material on them probably could not be read. They did it anyway. 11 years later, that decision was the entire case. Every episode of this channel eventually arrives at this same unglamorous truth. The breakthroughs get the headlines, but the breakthroughs are only ever possible because somebody, decades earlier, did the careful, boring, thankless work of saving something for a future they would never see. The second is about what Anna herself did. I've been careful throughout this episode not to describe what was done to her, and I'm not going to start now. But I want to be very clear about one thing, because it is the truest thing in this story. Anna Palmer, 10 years old, alone on her own porch against a 19-year-old man, fought. And in fighting, she took hold of him and kept a piece of him under her fingernails, and she held on to it. The district attorney said it exactly right when it was over. It was through science that a little girl who was tragically and horrifically murdered was able to point to her killer. She did not survive. But she is, in a real and literal sense, the reason he was caught. The evidence that convicted Matthew Breck came from Anna's own hands. And the third is the simplest. Anna was a kid who called her mom at work to ask if she could go outside and play. She got a yes. She spent her last afternoon doing exactly what she loved, being out on her block with the other children, being the socialite her mother described. She walked home to her own front door. She should have walked through it. Her mother should have come home to a 10-year-old with stories about her afternoon. Instead, it took 11 years to learn that the man who took her had been living a short walk away the entire time. It came far too late, but it came because a child fought back and because someone saved what she took. If this story stayed with you, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe, because the next one is already waiting.